everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. Today is day 37. So we are in Exodus. If you're reading along with me, I hope you're reading along with me. I am using the 1 Year Chronological Online Bible reading plan. And so it is going chronologically, historically, rather than just reading beginning to end. And so it just gives us a better reading, gives me at least a better reading and a better understanding of how the Bible sort of sits together as a full story. And it is a full story. So, and I hope if you're reading it that you're going to start to notice those things. So today we are in, again, it's day 37, Exodus 16 through 19. So it's a nice big chunk of Exodus. And yesterday we finished off with them getting out of Egypt. And so Moses came along and him and Aaron performed miracles. Pharaoh was the king of Egypt and he was trying to keep them enslaved. And then Moses, through God, God through Moses, I should say, saved the Israelites. And now they are in the wilderness and they are walking towards Mount Sinai. And so this is kind of where we find them. And these 4 chapters have a lot of really interesting connections, and I don't really know how chronological they are. So it looks like at one point he sort of sits in the judgment scene, and at one point there's a war with the Amalekites, and at one point he goes up and meets God. And so I'm not really sure the way in which these things exactly happen. So the chronological order, I assume they're relatively close to each other, but again, I'm not necessarily sure, but there seemed to be something that the author, who I'm going to say is Moses or Aaron, something that they wanted us to know in this section. And so what I took away as a whole, and I obviously, as always, I try to go into some smaller details, but what I took away from as a whole was what the role of Moses is in this area. So what he seems to have become, and if to go back a little bit and sort of just be reminded of who Moses was. Moses was an Israelite that was born in captivity, so in slavery, but he was born at the time where Pharaoh was killing firstborn sons. Nope, Pharaoh was killing all sons of the Israelite people because they were growing way too numerous. And so he was letting the girl children live, but he was killing the male children. And Moses's mother protected him by putting him in a basket in the water. And that basket led to Pharaoh's daughter finding him and raising him. So what we know about him is he was born of the Israelites, and God is using him for a purpose. And the purpose, as we have seen so far, is to save his people. And it is to show who he is. So to use that saving to show the breadth, the depth, the height, the width, right? Like the grandness and the greatness of who God is. Because the miracles that Moses and Aaron performed through the hand of God were massive. They were things like plague of frogs and plague of gnats and killing all the animals and killing the firstborn sons and darkness to where you couldn't see. So there were all of these plagues that happened. And then eventually Pharaoh let them go. And then he parted the Red Sea where it was completely dry. And there were 2 walls of water on either side. And the Israelites were able to walk through. And then God, again, through Moses, got the wheels stuck and people stuck inside. And then the water came and just slaughtered all the Egyptians that were following him and all the chariots that were following him. And so these people eventually died. Well, not eventually, those people died. And then the next morning, the Israelites were free. No sooner were they free than they were complaining. And so this is sort of where we find them. They are complaining about nothing is really good enough, but the power of God is massive, and he's using Moses. So what I notice in these sections about Moses and how he's being used by God, so this is just sort of, I don't have any fancy names for them, but this is who we see that he is. He is the bringer of food and water, right? And again, God is doing all these things, but he's using Moses as the tool to do these things. So God is bringing them food and water. They don't have food and water. They're out in the desert. So God is bringing them food, or Moses is bringing them food and water. So Moses is the giver of food and water. He is the banner in this war. He is the one who we see his arms are raised, and when his arms are raised, the war is being won. And he is the judge, so he comes and judges all these cases that people bring in front of him. He becomes a representative, so he's a representative of God and the decrees that God gives. He is a teacher, so at one point he is asked to teach certain things, and he is a ruler, so he is somebody who's been delegating. So he has really a lot of power in the amongst these people. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, he is under God, but he's the prophet, the leader, the teacher. That he encompasses anything and everything that a leader would have in power when it comes to the Israelite people, right? So he is ultimately the voice of God when it comes to the Israelite people. So what I'm seeing is that God has now lifted them up out of captivity as a massive, huge people group. He has put a head over top of them, and then he is over that head, right? Because it always comes down to God is the ultimate in all things, but Moses is the voice and the one who kind of judges and gives rules and gives decrees, but it's through the authority of God. And so there are sometimes even where God says, I want to do this for you, so they all know that you are the one to follow. So he wants Moses to be his voice to these people. And so I'm seeing an established community under God with a leader. And so this is something that I haven't necessarily noticed before, because Abraham had some people, right, that he led, but it wasn't a huge people group. And his siblings had people that were considered Hebrews, and then Jacob and Esau, and then Jacob, he didn't really lead anything. He was sort of just, or Isaac, I should say first. Isaac, the land prospered under Isaac. And so we can see different areas had, or different times had, they were kind of leaders of their own household, but they weren't leaders of this huge people group that we would call the Israelites or the Hebrews, because that's what it was called. It's called both now, but it was called those who are of Abraham's descent are, which there were many. If you remember, he had lots and lots of kids after he had Ishmael and Isaac, and they had children. And so what I notice is that they had like small people groups, but they didn't have this overwhelming, encompassing group that he's taking out and he's making holy, which is what we're going to see him do. And so I find this fascinating that now it looks like he's establishing a community of people. Okay, so but I want to start us in Exodus 16. And so that's sort of the overwhelming gist of what I get. And again, a little bit of out of order, but I want to discuss some of the things that I see in there. One of the things that you can see right away is in chapter 16, they are grumbling. So the Israelite people, and I laugh because I'm the person that can see it from the outside looking in, and yet I am 100% a grumbler. I have days where I just don't want to get up and do anything. And I want to be like, why would you put me here? Why did you give me this group to lead? Why do I have to have these conversations? Why do I have to show up at certain things, right? And yet they're people of God, and they're people that I believe that God has put in front of me for a reason, to either encourage and lift up, or to be taught by, or to teach, right? So there are reasons that we need to be there. And I constantly find myself grumbling. So they are at this point just, they want to do what God says, but they aren't getting what they want. They for some reason they keep remembering that Egypt was a good place for them to be. And so even as we become followers of, so for right now, I'm going to say followers of Christ, right? So as Christ becomes, and being an adult believer, as Christ becomes the person that I begin to follow, where I was following the world and the things of this world and the people of this world, now I'm following Christ. And so I have to let some of that other stuff go that I actually thought was good, but it wasn't. And so I have to recognize that even if I don't have some of the same things that I thought were blessings then, it is better because God has me here. So even if I don't have the same friends that I had before because I'm unable now, according to God, to do the things I was doing then. What I have now is better because this is of God and it's through God. And so I have to just be careful with my wishing for something that isn't of God because I'm forgetting what is good and what isn't good. And I'm forgetting that God has me here and that being with God is always ultimately better than having any blessings of the world, right? So, like being easy for me to say, being poor but having God is better than being rich and having everything, or being rich and not having God, right? So having everything and not having God isn't as great as having nothing but having God. So, but I have to remind myself of that because I very easily go, oh my gosh, I really miss meat. I still eat meat, but I'm just saying of the Israelites. I really wish meat. I really miss meat, or I miss leeks, or other things that they talk about. So, so they left this really beautiful land and they're going into the desert, and then they're grumbling, they're wishing for death, they're complaining about Moses, right? So they're blaming Moses for bringing them out there. So I want to go to verse 16, number 4, chapter 16, verse 4. The Lord says to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. So this is where the manna comes in. I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, because here we go, in this way, I will test them. So you think you're not going to be tested. We're being tested all the time. And because it's God, it just is, right? I can complain and I can be mad about it, but that's just a reality. I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. So are you going to do what he asked you to do? When he puts something heavy on your heart, are you going to listen, or are you going to make excuses why you're not going to do it? On the 6th day, they're to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So every day he is going to give manna, right? So if we keep kind of going through the story, he's going to give manna. It only lasts that day. You're only allowed to take what you need. So if you gather more, it's not going to be more. So you're like, oh, I'm going to stay out there for 2 hours and I'm going to get 17 manna cakes today because I'm really hungry today. That's not what you're going to get, because that's not what God wants you to have, right? Or I don't feel like working, so I'm not going to go out and get, right? Every day it's the same, right? It is a small measured amount of food, and it's the right amount of food for you. And so obviously for each person, right? So he wants you to go out and he wants you to get it. So your work is that your job is to go out and you're to get that food. If you keep it, it's going to get worms, it's going to rot, and it's going to be gross. But on the 6th day, you're going to get extra and it's going to stay. So miracle of miracles. So here we go. They're seeing and they're watching all these miracles happen, but we're amongst people, and people get in your ear and people say things to you, and then you forget the miracles that he does for you. So I urge you to not forget all the things that he's done for you in the past, right? So this is one of the things that we do. All right. And then I want to go to verse 11. One of the verses I have written down. The Lord says to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. And I laugh because I wrote in my notes that they're being whiny. And again, I want to stress that I still want to say that they're whiny. I'm not saying I don't do it. I do it, but I know that I'm being whiny, right? So I don't want to take away from the fact that I have compassion and I understand that they were essentially torn, but left a place that they were used to and conditioned to, and came into a different place that they are not used to or conditioned to. And the food is different, and the blessings are different, and the water supply is different, but they're with God. And so while I can say I have been whiny, and so I can be compassionate and I can be understanding, I also want to say I shouldn't be whiny when God gives me things, but it's not the things that I wanted or expected. All right, now moving on to verse 26. I have here, he says, eat it today, Moses says. So this is that extra day. And he says, because today is Sabbath, you will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. And of course, people still go out and gather on the 7th day. But this goes all the way back to when he created the earth. And if you guys remember, when he created the earth, he had made the 7th day holy, He rested on the seventh day. And now here he is. This is the first time we've really seen it, enacting it with his, again, here we go, establishing a people group. He's enacting this with his people group. And he's saying, I don't want you to work on this day. I want you to rest on this day. And so maybe in a way, we're sort of establishing what rest means. So rest means maybe not going out and laboring for what you need. It means just sitting and being with the Lord instead. All right, now verse 32. We don't know why yet, but we will find out. But it says, take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come. So again, this is this idea here. He's establishing so much in these few chapters. He doesn't want the future generations to forget. We must remember in order to know who our God is. If you do not know who you're worshiping, your worship is skewed. It's off kilter. It's not what it should be. So we have to remember what he did, how big it was, in order to worship the proper God and in order to worship him properly. So he says to take this manna, to keep it for the generations to come. And it says also that they ate manna for 40 years. So right now you're like, why 40 years? I don't think they've been in there that long, but we'll find out soon enough. So they did. They ate manna for 40 years. I'm sure it got monotonous, but they ate manna for 40 years. Manna is a complete free gift. All they had to do was wake up in the morning and go pick it and bring it back and cook it. So it didn't cost them money. They didn't have to go to war for it. It was a gift given to them and them alone. Nobody else had this. This was a special thing that was given to them as their people. All right. I want to move on to chapter 17. And in chapter 17, verse 1, they're moving around, and once again, everybody's complaining. So it says, the whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. And again, I'm not really sure where this definitely fits chronologically. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they fought with Moses and they said, give us water. And he says, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? So testing the Lord, I feel like is, so the meaning of test is establishes quality, performance, or reliability of something. That's just like a standard, you write, what is a test? And this is the standard definition. It is establishing quality, performance, or reliability of something. So they've already gotten water. If you remember, Moses threw that stick. They've already seen animals killed from the Egyptians, but not them. The firstborn killed from the Egyptians, but they put the blood around for the Passover. So they've already seen all of these things. So he's like, why do you keep testing me? Why are you trying to establish the quality of me? Why are you trying to establish my performance? Don't you see what I have already done for you? Why are you trying to establish my reliability? Why are you asking, to see if I'm reliable? I have done all these things for you already. Don't you remember? I mean, I don't care if it stays months or years. I don't care if this is 15 years later. The miracles he performs here have not been seen before. So these are abundant. They happen all the time. So these are things that are happening consistently, right? Like, are they watching and forgetting that it's miraculous, right? You're in it so long, you forget that it's actually a miracle, that when, there's a cloud above you and you're following it, you forget that that's God. When there's a fire every single night that you're following, you forget that that's God. You just go, yeah, we just follow the fire. Maybe they think it's sort of like pointing north, right? I'm not sure, but they seem to forget all the time who God is. And so they keep testing him. So they're grumbling, they're complaining. Oh, we don't have water. God has already given them water. But what does he do? He's compassionate because that's who he is. And he gives them water again. And I want to move to verse 8. So in verse 8, it says the Amalekites came. So now we have a war. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites in Rephidim. I'm going to say Rephidim. And then Moses said to Joshua, so Joshua starts to lead the people in this war. And by the way, the Amalekites are Esau's people. And so if you guys remember Esau way back when, Esau is the twin brother of Jacob. Jacob steals his birthright. So Esau is somebody who he's not part of the covenant. But he is the son of Isaac, who is part of the covenant, but he seems to have turned away from God, and his people no longer seem to follow God. Are they Hebrews? I don't know, but they don't seem to follow God. And right now we see they're warring against God's particular people, who are the Israelites. So in this is where I sort of said Moses is a banner, which is like he's the, I don't want to say herald because he's not calling out, but he is in an area. He's all the way up on the top of the mountain, and they're down below, and they're warring, right? So it's people against people, an actual war. They're shooting arrows, things like that. And every time Moses is exhausted, so every time his hands start to drop, they start to lose this war. So there's something where they need the strength of Moses through God. They need that strength in order to continue to win, because every time Moses' arms were raised up again, they started winning again. So God has given Moses the ability to be the one to lead the people through miraculous means, but also through regular combat, right? There's still regular combat between the two of them. And then I like this too, where there's extra people that are helping him. So people are giving him rocks to hold the arms up. So there are people, he's not alone, even though he's the ultimate power and authority right under God. He's not alone in any of this. He has people helping him. All right, now I want to move on to Exodus 18. And as Exodus 18, Moses' father-in-law comes, and again, chronologically, let's just be careful. Moses looks like he sent his wife and his two sons away. The one son the one son we know was born in Midian. The other son seems to have been born maybe in Egypt, just because of his name. It seems like he was born in Egypt, but at one point he sends Zipporah, his first wife, or his wife, he sends her and the two sons away to go back and live in Midian with the father-in-law, maybe to protect them, maybe for traveling. I'm not really sure. We don't find out too much about that at this point. But all of them come back and they meet with Moses, and Jethro is sort of, which is the father-in-law, Zipporah's father, excuse me. He seems to be a guide for Moses. He seems to really help him. First thing that we notice is he hears Moses tells him all the stories about God, and he believes, and he thinks, oh my gosh, your God is an amazing God. And then he sacrifices to him. So he becomes one of God's followers, one of God's people, because he trusts that God did what Moses said that he did. And so he loves him, honors him with sacrifice, and he follows him. And then he leaves Zipporah there. And then Moses starts to become the judge. So Moses sits down at one point, and all these people are coming to him. And this is what I found really interesting is all the people are coming to him. And it says, because they want to know God's will. So he's a judge, but he's judging what God's will is in the situation. He's not going, well, that seems right, or that's a lie, or that guy was a jerk, or whatever it is he's actually talking to the Lord, and he's finding out what the Lord's will is in this situation. Now, father-in-law says, you cannot do this alone. So what you have to do is you have to take God's decrees and teach them to all the people. And then the people, you need to raise these people up, and then they need to start going to like essentially smaller courts, right? And then you get the really big ones, and then everyone else kind of gets the small ones. And so they start establishing ground that way. And then so then Moses, again, is the ultimate authority, right? Moses is over top of all those people. He has taught them God's decrees, so the things that God deems right and wrong, the things that he wants them to follow. So we're just really digging into what a community of people look like, and then how that's going to run. So I find it really I mean, I'm sure other places in the world have a lot of this as well, but this is directly related to what God wants and what God says and what God's rules are. And so that's how these people are going to live in this community. These people are going to live as followers of God. All right, now, and then Jethro winds up going back to Midian. So he goes back to his hometown. He's a follower now. He loves God. And then moving on to this last chapter, this is Exodus 19. And then here we go. Moses is speaking to God. So this is another in verse 5, which I like. This is, I already said it, I think maybe yesterday or the day before, but there was an if-then statement. And I see another one in here. So in verse 5, It says, now if, and I know I'm overemphasizing it, but because I feel like I like to hear it. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possessions. Although the whole earth is mine, so everything and everyone and all the animals and all the it's all mine. I have all of it. You are going to be a special, specific people. And although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So this is what Moses is supposed to tell the people. So now we have segregated in a way these people. These people are supposed to be priests. And I don't know if everyone's supposed to be literally a priest, but the idea of a priest, somebody who follows God, someone who with all their heart, their soul, their mind, their strength, everything they have, they follow God. They are a priest on this earth for this God, and they are a holy or set apart nation. So he has specifically picked them, knowing that everybody else is his. He's showing the world now that you guys are my people. You are going to follow me. If you obey me, I will treasure you, right? I've already picked you out. I've already called you me, right? I already saved you from slavery. I've already called you to me. I've already promised you land, right? He's already done all those things. Now, if you obey me, I will treasure you. So I feel like that's like a little above and beyond, like they're going to get a little extra, right? So if you obey me, and those who follow him, that does happen. All right. So moving on to verse 9. Almost down here. The Lord said to Moses, I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud, that the people will hear me speaking to you and will put their trust in you. So then this is where God comes down and he sounds like thunder, and right. So they all see this cloud sort of speaking, and Moses is sort of speaking to this cloud. This cloud is sort of thundering and everything at Moses. And so then they know, okay, Moses is the guy. Moses is talking to God. We can put our trust and our faith in Moses as a prophet of the Lord, as somebody who speaks through God. And in verse 10, the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. And some of the things that he does. So to consecrate them, it means to declare them holy. So we consecrate the people by making them, he's declaring them holy. And when he declares them holy, then he wants them to wash their clothes, and he wants them to come back in 3 days. And then they're going to do this big thing on the mountain. So here we go with our 3 again. So we've got our number in there. And then this idea of washing. So I brought up multiple times the idea of fire and the idea of water. It seems to be a trend that we're hearing. Terrible word. It seems to be something that we're hearing over and over again, this idea of fire and water. God is represented by fire, but water is sort of life to us. If you go up on that mountain, you're going to die. Just a heads up. The mountain is holy. That is where God is. And he says to these people, and I'm going to hear it. It's unfair. He says to these people, do not touch the mountain. Recognize how holy I am. I am the mountain. Do not touch that mountain until I tell you it's okay. Obey me, and I will treasure you. Obey me. What I say might be the dumbest thing that you think that you have heard. You obey me. Why? Because I'm God. Because I saved you as a people. I brought you out of slavery. I brought you to me. You are mine, and I treasure you. All right. And then this is another thing that I thought was interesting, the consecration in verse 13. He says, if anyone touches the mountain, he says, I want you to kill them. And he says, I want you to stone them, or I want you to shoot them with a bow and arrow. Don't touch them. And so you can't even touch it. So again, we're going to start seeing more of this. But right now we're starting to see that like there's no, we're setting ourselves apart. We're having these standards now that we have to have. I can't even touch anyone who's touched the mountain. So you touch the mountain, you're going to die. You can't even touch someone that's touched the mountain. So see how we're starting to establish these layers of obedience to God and cleanliness, right? And cleanliness in that. All right. And then in verse 18, it says, Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. So this is what these people are seeing at this point. I'm hoping it's registering to them that this is God and he is holy, and they're starting to follow and listen. I'm hoping as you guys are reading it, you're starting to do the same. Maybe hopefully not thinking, well, that's ridiculous, but really starting to think, well, what does it mean? Why did they have to wash? Why couldn't they touch the mountain? Why, right? So start asking yourselves some of these questions as you're reading it. So instead of automatically thinking how God has done something weird or wrong, or he's asking too much, just start asking yourself why. And if it seems weird or odd to you, why then does it seem weird or odd to you? So what does God need, or what is he asking for? And then, what's your response to that? So just sort of digging into what a lot of this means, because I'm really seeing God showing his power, and then he's starting to have some expectations from his people that he has saved. So I'm going to end it there today. That's the end of 19. I'm sure there were a million other things that we could have dove into. And again, as always, I'd love if you commented to what you saw and what hit you in each chapter, or just one little blip or blurb, whatever it is that you want to add on to, because I know there's a lot in there. If this was a blessing to you, please like it, share it, and subscribe to the page so it will come to you every single day. I really want you guys reading with me. So if you're only listening at this point, I'd love for you to dive in. There's so much more in there than anything that I'm talking about. So dive in there and read it for yourselves so you can know exactly what God is trying to show us. And then I will see you next time.